Hello, welcome to the Washington Circle podcast. I'm Élison Santos, and here we explore the world through the lens of mental health. Our goal is to bring together diverse perspectives on global events, uncovering how they impact our minds, emotions, and well-being. Join us as we connect psychology with the pulse of what's happening around the world, fostering deeper understanding and meaningful conversations. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with a dear colleague from Israel, a seasoned psychologist and logotherapist whom I've had the honor to knowing for many years. In this conversation, we delve into a topic that we both deeply value and teach, logotherapy, the existential approach developed by Viktor Frankl. As she shares her insights on the current state of mental health in Israel, she offers a unique perspective shaped by her professional experience and personal reflections. Her observations help us better understand the complexities of Israeli society, especially in the aftermath of the October 7 attacks, and the evolving mindset of people living through ongoing conflict. I want to remind you that the goal of these interviews is not to present my own opinions, but to ask thoughtful, critical questions that allow our guests to express their perspectives on their societies. In this episode, we discuss a wide range of important topics, including logotherapy and its relevance in times of crisis, mental health challenges in Israel today, the rise of addiction and coping mechanisms, existential crisis in the face of ongoing conflict, the dynamics of violence, manipulation, and personal responsibility, the concept of the will to power and its societal implications, massification and totalitarianism in modern contexts, the psychological impact of the October 7 attacks on Israeli society, spirituality and Judaism in times of war, the struggle for survival and the notion of heroism in crisis situations, the role of religious beliefs and the dangers of misinterpretation, the philosophical idea of monanthropism, Israeli perspectives on Palestinian people, Viktor Frankl's concept of collective guilt and its relevance today, the prevailing belief in Israel that a Palestinian state may not lead to peace, the powerful role of propaganda in shaping and distorting perceptions on both sides. Alongside this episode, I am also releasing an interview with a Palestinian psychiatrist who shares her perspectives on mental health, society, and the psychological impact of conflict in Palestine. I strongly encourage you to listen to both interviews, as together they provide a more comprehensive and nuanced understanding of the complex realities of the region. By hearing voices from both sides, we can deepen our knowledge, foster empathy, and engage in more informed, meaningful conversations about the challenges faced by individuals and communities affected by ongoing conflict. Hey, welcome to the Washington Circle podcast. It's great to have you here, and I'm here today with a very special guest, my colleague from Israel. She is also a professor in our graduate certificate course at IP Sapiens, the clinical logotherapy. I'm here with Batya Yaniger. Batya holds a PsyD in psychology from California Coast University, and is a certified social worker in Israel. She holds a diploma in logotherapy from Gordon College in Israel, issued in conjunction with the Viktor Frankl Institute of Logotherapy in the United States, Batya has given presentations at conferences worldwide, as well as webinars and workshops. She is currently writing a book demonstrating principles of logotherapy through a Torah lens and through student anecdotes of logotherapy in their lives. Batya co-hosts the podcast Search for Meaning, together with Professor Tony Burton, who is also a professor at our course. So, Batya, thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you for being here with us. I'm excited about our conversation.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
My first question for you is, can you tell us about your history with logotherapy and how it has shaped your approach to mental health?
Okay, I don't know if logotherapy changed my approach to mental health. It's more that I was looking for an approach, which I didn't know what to call it logotherapy yet, because I was a social worker looking for something that would resonate with me, especially the idea that we are pushed by drives and pulled by values. When I read that, I knew that was what I was looking for. And this values focus of logotherapy makes it relate to the human in us. And the more human we are, the healthier we are.
Right, yeah.
One of the most meaningful ideas to me is Frankl's reference to the ancient wisdom of Hillel, the Jewish sage, who said, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am concerned only with myself, what kind of person am I? And if not now, then when?" So I'd like to explain what these three statements mean. If I am not for myself, well, what does that mean? It means if I'm not responsible for myself, then who will be responsible for me? Because no one can live my life for me. I am free to decide. I have to take responsibility for my own choices. Secondly, if I'm concerned only with myself, then what kind of person am I? We are not machines. We're not animals who live just to eat, sleep, and procreate. We are here for a higher purpose, and therefore we have to care about something beyond ourselves. And thirdly, if I don't do it now, when will I do it? At every given moment, we have the opportunity to leave the world a better place than it was when we came into it. And making clients aware of these perspectives helps them to be more psychologically healthy. As I said before, that the more human we are, the healthier we are.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And I think that this is a very good perspective, right? I think that these words, this quote, they are from Rabbi Hillel, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, and it's spectacular. This is something that I always think about in my life as well, right? If not today, when? If it's just for me, who am I, right? And these are questions that everyone should ask. And I think it has a lot to do with the meaning of life, right? And the perspective. What am I here for? And also what Frankl says about the unique sense of our identity, right? There's nobody like us. So if I don't do, who will do? And even if other people can do what I do, it will not be the same in the same way, right? Because we have different histories, different perspectives.
Yeah, they're also, you're reminding me that there's so many definitions in logotherapy which are different from the rest of the world, from the rest of psychology. Because you might say, oh, do it right away, because if you procrastinate and you put it off, you might not get to it later. But in logotherapy, we're saying, no, it's more than that. It's deeper than that. There's a meaning to this particular moment, why you're being given that opportunity right now. So you have to take advantage of it.
Yeah, the meaning of time and life and the perspective about death, right? We know that this life has an end, so we have to seize the day, but not in terms of pleasure only, right? It's part of life, but in terms of what does our mind our lives, what do our lives serve for, right? In this world, that's great. That's great. Yeah. Well, coming from this perspective, what do you see today as the major challenges in mental health?
So there are many, many challenges. The mental health crisis today is very challenging, more than ever. Frankl talked about addiction and depression and aggression, and that's certainly still true today. Those are major problems. And I'd like to focus on the health crisis, the social crisis, and the meaning crisis. So
Right.
the reason why is because all of those have one common root cause. And the root cause of all of these major challenges to mental health is how we see ourselves. Do we see ourselves as disconnected or connected? And how we see the world, as meaningless or inherently meaningful. So what difference does it make if we see ourselves as disconnected from a mental health standpoint? Disconnection can lead in two opposite directions: depression and violence. Depression, because if you're not connected to anything, you turn inward in victimhood and self-absorption and feel alone in the world, as if nobody cares if you live or die. And disconnection also leads to violence, because you will turn outward to try to control and to manipulate others. So either way, such a person has no sense of responsibility, because they're not responsible to anything beyond themselves, and they're merely driven by the will to pleasure or the will to power, or unthinkingly just follows the mass and gets duped by totalitarian regimes. Depression then leads to over-medication, which comes in part from the expectation that we always must be happy, and we cannot tolerate even a little bit of discomfort. If we understand that there's value to be found in learning from our emotions, we don't have to anesthetize them. Complex emotions are part of being human, and they're a rich source of meaning. This is especially the case when depressed feelings have a spiritual cause. So relying on pills to solve everything shows an unhealthy intolerance for dealing with life. And as for the social crisis, failed relationships are an inevitable part of being disconnected to the world. There's no other that we can relate to. All of our dialogues are just monologues. I'm not interested in listening to the other's needs or considering their opinion. The world only exists to cater to my needs, and I'm always right. So that's one side of the challenges we face, how we see ourselves. And then the other side is how we see the world. What difference does it make to see the world as meaningless from a mental health standpoint? If there's no objective meaning that calls us, then there's no objective morality. Meaning begins and ends with me. And since there's no intrinsic meaning, I arbitrarily assign meaning, and then I can even insist that mass murder is meaningful to me, because I know it all. I don't need God. I don't need any objective standard of morality. I'm the one who controls everything, right? So this might sound like an ethical question, but it is actually a mental health question, because when I find out that I'm actually not in control, like we've seen recently with the fires raging through California, in the Palisades, it's horrible, right? So then I become desperate and despairing, as well as cruel and destructive.
Yeah.
And one more point I want to make to answer that question. I know it's a long answer, but the perspective of meaninglessness distorts freedom. Because thinking the freedom means you could do whatever you please, that's just the will to power. That also takes me back to my self-contained existence.
Right.
That leads to anarchy.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, it's interesting because how did we arrive here, right? What are these points that in our culture globally that takes us to these consequences of individualism? And
you might say.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
You might say that the will it's something about us as human beings. Just the will to pleasure and the will to power
Right.
makes us just focus on ourselves, right? But I think there's also this cultural tendency towards not really knowing how to conceive of the individual vis-a-vis the community, and
Exactly.
where we stand. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot of confusion.
Well, yeah, there is this text by Viktor Frankl that I really love it when he talks about mass and community, right? And he will write and talk about how imperfect we are as individuals. And this imperfection actually helps us to understand how important it is the community. And it's interesting that somehow in our cultures around the world, right, and globally speaking, we learn that differences can be dangerous, and we know wherever there are more conflicts, it has more to do with these highlighting the differences and hiding the things that put us closer to each other, right? Uh, yeah, and in understanding and accepting the differences and accepting the imperfection, right? It seems that accepting the difference or dealing with the differences has to do with accepting and adjusting with the imperfection that we have, right? We are not perfect. That's
Right.
something that we can agree, right?
Yeah, a long time ago, I remember thinking that I don't like the word tolerance because it
Right,
sounds like you're kind of carrying a burden on your shoulders of allowing the other person to be different.
right.
Instead, we need to actually embrace the difference because we need to appreciate that every person, in their imperfections, has something unique to contribute, and
Yeah,
and and that's why it's actually important that there are differences.
yeah. Well, one of the things, and this is one of the goals of this podcast, right? That the idea to talk to psychologists and mental health professionals from different places. I think for me it's amazing because I'm learning a lot, right? As we did in our meetings of the network, right? When we listen to psychologists from Greece or from Italy or from China or Japan, you see that the fact that we are different and we have different perspectives, it's not threatening. Much more of the contrary. It helps us to broaden our perspectives about what is human life, right? I
Right. I
think this
think
is
I think
great.
if we feel secure within ourselves, then we're not threatened by that.
Yeah,
It's only when people feel insecure.
yeah, definitely, yeah. Well, one next question here is how do you think that logotherapy can address these challenges, and what makes it particularly suited for today's issues?
Yeah. Okay. So logotherapy says that the world does not revolve around me. I'm part of something bigger, a meaningful part of a meaningful whole. That's an expression of Elizabeth Lucas. I love that expression. We're each a meaningful part of a meaningful whole. And logotherapy addresses that problem of disconnection by helping the individual focus on something beyond themselves, to realize that they can't just define themselves as by according to their neediness, but that how am I needed, instead.
Right,
And instead of being self-centered, logotherapy makes us self-aware. So each of us is unique, as Frankl said. He said to be is to be different. So that's a phrase that he used. To be is to be different, right? So to
right,
be in a relationship, we have to embrace difference. That's what it means to be in a relationship. And regarding the crisis of meaning, Frankl said, since we cannot see the bigger picture, it is not knowledge which decides, but faith and commitment. Right.
right,
So, what is this commitment to? It's a commitment to values. It's a commitment to something that we know through our deep inner knowing, not something we can prove, and that's where I very much like what Ian McGilchrist says about the left and the right hemispheres of the brain. And speaking to your question you had before earlier, how did we get here? So he talks about how great civilizations fall when the left hemisphere, which pays attention to only a small fraction of reality and thinks it knows everything, and the right hemisphere knows it doesn't know everything, but sees things in context. Right? And really, they're supposed to be working together, but instead, when the left hemisphere dominates, that's when we're in big trouble. Right?
Yeah.
So the right hemisphere understands things can only be understood in their context. So a strictly scientific mode of attention, where everything has to be measured and everything has to be proven, actually excludes anything that can't be measured, like love, nature, beauty, right? Those are the very things that give life meaning, right? So then how can you complain that you don't have any meaning when you're excluding what gives life meaning? So logotherapy assumes there's meaning in everything, even suffering. So we have to minimize suffering when we can, but often we bring suffering on ourselves with our attitude. And like you said before, when we don't want to accept our flaws, we don't want to accept other people's flaws. Right? So we were each born in a particular time and place with a particular upbringing, natural talents, and circumstances. And when we do something good with whatever it is that life sends us, then we become good for something.
Right.
So through his concentration camp experience, Frankl understood that instead of asking what we expect from life, we need to ask what life expects from us. The problem actually gives you a task and an invitation. So whatever's happening, we can always ask, what is the situation challenging me to do? Mm-hmm. And in all of these ways, logotherapy brings about a rediscovery of the human in us. And because we rediscover the human in us, that's how logotherapy addresses the challenges of today.
Yeah. Yes. That is something really where we see that Viktor Frankl could see from the shoulders of giants, right? When he talks about other great psychologists that came before him, and he says that he's not better, but he can see, even the dwarf can see further if he is on the shoulders of giants. And I think it was Rollo May that said that it was the biggest contribution of Viktor Frankl to psychology to be able to see the spiritual factor of human life in our psychology, right? In our behavior, and yeah. Well, I'm also glad that you mentioned Ian McGilchrist. I'm writing actually a paper about a concept that I started thinking many years ago, and it's present in my book, Heroes of Our Existence. And the topic is existential parallelism. The idea that we have these cognitive biases, and that somehow makes us misunderstand reality. As you were saying, right, that sometimes we not just think that we are right, and the left hemisphere knows that we are not, but sometimes even influenced by existential vacuum, we take decisions. We make decisions, right? We take steps. We start a life. We build a career. We build a life based on misconceptions. And it seems to be and that's why I talk about parallelism, existential parallelism, in a way that when you start to write, it's similar to the highway, but it's different, right? You take this road, it's parallel. You think it's gonna take you to the same place that the highway will take you. but then it will take you to a very different way. And it seems when I see some conjunctions in the news or in the international debate about human problems, sometimes I think that they are talking about something very different, right? That they took a topic that they think that is the most important topic, and they are not addressing what is essentially the problem that we are living today. So we see a lot of decisions made on economics, on economical factors, or on transportation factors, and or political factors, geopolitical factors, and they are not talking about human essence, right? And responsibility, freedom, meaning. Well, what do you think about that? Does it make sense to you?
Well, one of the things that Frankl said was we have to help people see reality as it is.
Yeah.
So why shouldn't we be able to see reality as it is? And as you say, we have a certain bias and we pay attention to certain things and not other things, and we don't see the whole picture.
Right.
And then we just run with it without thinking. We just follow what everybody else. What you said before about the mass. We follow what everybody else is saying.
Yeah. Oh, well, what Frankl says, right, about conformism. Well, you don't do what you think it's right, but you just do what other people are doing. So it's conformism. Or you do what other people were telling you to do. What is totalitarianism? So where are the minds, right? Well, where are we as humans, essentially humans, right? Yeah. Okay, that's good. Well, from your perspective, well, let's talk now, if you may, about your reality there in Israel. Right, we know that Israel, you are in a region that is very historical for humanity, right? And Israel is present in the Holy Scriptures, right, from 1,000 years ago. And this is a very interesting moment in history as well. And you are in a very interesting place for all of us. From your perspective, Batya, what are the primary psycho-spiritual challenges faced by people in Israel nowadays?
So it's a good question, and I would like to separate it into two parts. One is who we are, challenging us to be ourselves, because life always challenges us to be ourselves, right? And also our relationship to the world. So keep in mind that the meaning of challenge in logotherapy is you are challenged to do something. So when I talk about how we're challenged, I'm going to say, what are we actually challenged to do?
Right.
Being challenged to do. So we're being challenged to a lot of things, to defend ourselves, to strengthen our faith and hope in the midst of a war for our survival, and to pray and to enjoy life, not give in to terrorists who don't want us to enjoy life, and to answer evil with good. So on October 7th, the heroism, I'm in the middle of reading a book now called One Day in October. I really recommend it for people to read this, because there's many, many stories of heroism in there, of just ordinary people. It shows what ordinary people are capable of. That nobody expected. It took something like these atrocities to actually bring that out of them. That people went back and forth over and over again to save as many lives as they could while they're under gunfire, or someone who was in a hiding place with a narrow opening, and each time the terrorist threw a grenade, he caught the grenade and threw it back. Until finally the 8th time it killed him, right?
Yeah.
And there are just so many stories. That's just like a tiny, tiny tip of the iceberg. But suffering challenges us also to grow in our faith. And there's one person I know who, she said 7 members of her family were drafted to the army. And she told herself, I don't have any control. I am just doing my best to add good to the world. And, when her son went into Gaza and something happened to his unit, and she just imagined the worst. So she thought, okay, better get home because when there's a knock at the door, I want to be there. So she really was imagining the worst. And that's when she started to pray. So when we're in a very, very difficult situation, that brings that prayer out of us, that forced her to pray for her son and also for the whole country. And secondly, we're challenged to understand each other better, the right and left politically, religious and secular. In Judaism, we have this very deeply ingrained value that when you see a need, go and fill it. And because of this value of doing for others, there was an explosion of volunteerism. So I talked about what we're challenged to do. So, so we were challenged to be there for each other, to pick produce in the fields, to raise money for ceramic bulletproof vests, to make soup for soldiers, meals for the wives of soldiers. But then when things are relatively quiet again, we start to argue amongst ourselves again. That's the natural thing. But we're being challenged to kind of rise above that pettiness, and regarding our relationship with the world, Israel was given the mission to be a light to the nations. So a lot of people don't understand, what does that mean, to be a light to the nations? And it means to be human and to be close to God, which actually means to become more human by being close to God. Because our Jewish tradition teaches that just as God is compassionate, so you be compassionate. Just as God is gracious, so you be gracious. So that translates into go and help someone who needs your help. And then as far as the challenge of relating to the world, I want to refer to a metaphor which you alluded to, that Frankl used, saying we're not just replaceable bricks, we're like this mosaic, that each one is different. And I'm going to read from what he said. An individual existence not only must have the community in order to become meaningful, vice versa, the community needs the individual existence in order for it itself to have meaning. Therein lies an essential distinction between community and the mere mass. Far from providing a frame of reference for the individual existence, the mass does not tolerate individuality. The meaning of individuality is submerged in the mass, while in the community it emerges. By escape into the mass, man loses his most intrinsic quality, responsibility. True community is in essence the community of responsible persons. Mere mass is the sum of depersonalized entities. So this is a paragraph which you have to think about a little bit, and it's hard to take it all in. But I think when you look at the world and you see there's two kinds of pulls in different directions of the individual and individual rights, and you don't look at the community as a whole. And each individual has to have their rights. And then on the other side, there's, well, what's for the good of the whole? What's for the good of the world? And don't have to care about what's for the good of the individuals. And I think this perspective that Frankl is presenting is saying you can do both, because that's really what life and the world are about, is because we're all different, we all have something unique to contribute. That means that he has to respect the individuals as well. Just because you're doing something for the good of the whole doesn't mean that you ignore the needs of the individuals. And so I want to just add one more thing to this. Frankl was talking about the individual vis-a-vis the world. The same applies to individual nations vis-a-vis the global community. Each nation has something unique to contribute. So throughout our history, the Jewish people have been pursued. And now the time has come to take our place and work in harmony with the world, to actually step into our place in the world, as I say, to be a light to the nations by, first of all, modeling what it means to be human, which is to be conscious, free, and responsible, and then to kind of help the world along to attain that.
I think that this is a very good perspective, right? That talking about identity and community, and I think that the biggest challenge is, how do we strengthen strengthen our communities, people that we see that are closer to us, right? So people who live near me, people who believe the same values that I believe, and it's interesting when we have some differences, and we know this about group psychology, right? Systemic psychology, right? When this group has differences with other groups, we become stronger because then we are together and we face other groups. And I think the biggest challenge now is how can we also, as a group, form a community to other groups that are further from my group, right? And now that we have this globalized world, how do we do that? How do we build bridges, right? This is so difficult, right?
Well, I think that's what the logotherapy community does.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. We have common beliefs and common comprehensions, right? The understanding of how humans work, right? Through this scientific theory about human beings. Yeah, I agree with you. I think science in general helps us to unite, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I felt when I went to my first logotherapy conference in Dallas.
Right.
I felt like, hey, everybody's speaking the same language.
Yeah,
We're all talking about meaning, even though they come from all around the world. And same thing with my students who come from all around the world. I feel
right.
like it's such a colorful mix
Yeah.
of difference, and yet we feel how much we're all the same because
Yeah.
we're all interested in finding well, what is my place in the world, and everybody has their place.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah. Well, what do you think? Do you think that the challenges that Israel faces nowadays, they are unique to the region, or what can you tell us about how do you see societies around the world, and maybe specifically if you could talk about the Arab the society around you there, and also if you can, if you may, about the conflict.
Yeah. Okay. So on an individual level, we're all human beings, and and the individual challenges that we experience are similar to the rest of the world. A lot of people in Israel, it's different because, as I say, when you're pushed to an extreme, then that often brings more out of you. So people are woken up in some way to their faith. Suddenly, not necessarily becoming more religious all at once, but they're awakening their sense of connection to the Jewish people and to the country, to the land of Israel, because they're forced to ask themselves, like, why should I be here if all of this is going on? They're forced to ask themselves, what are we doing here? That's something I think that's unique, and people particularly find comfort through the belief that even as individuals, we are part of something greater, and the sense of being connected to history and facing a greater destiny. So if there's a life that's lost, that there's a feeling that everyone has that we are all part of an unfolding story. That we're still in the middle of it. And we don't know when or how it will end, but we believe that there's a good ending to the story. So to get back to just quickly to your point before about the differences. So no one would claim that in an orchestra, like the clarinet and the saxophone and the drums, we don't need them all. Like they're all needed. They all create harmony. Or in the body, we need both the spleen and the liver. So that's the idea that we're all needed, and we're meant to be different so that we can be a meaningful part. As I said before, a meaningful part of a meaningful whole. And so John Lennon's song "Imagine," I think, is so, it sounds so nice and sweet, but it goes so against this, because if there are no borders and no religion, and we're just all the same, then there's no mosaic
Yeah.
either. And we can't each fulfill our unique part. So the world is busy trying to reject religion, but understood properly, religion unifies us because it's only one God who could create so much difference, so much diversity, because there's one source for all of it, and so we're all on earth encountering each other and influencing and being influenced and being unified by that one creator that brings us together. So I didn't relate to your question yet about what's going on, what's going on with our, how we relate to the people around us, immediately around us, right? So, there are a lot of things we can't do anything about, and that's why we need prayer, right? We can't really do anything about the radical Islam and the the fact that 70% of Palestinians still support Hamas, and and we can't change that, but we can listen to what they're preaching in the mosques in the United States, and and we can stop pretending it doesn't exist, and we need to see that we need to recognize the seeds of terrorism and stop it and not let it grow. So we need to educate people. Educating, like you said, people hear little bits of information, they hear false information. We need to educate people. I guess that's part of the mission also, being a light to the nations, is to educate.
Yes.
And so for the foreseeable future, I don't, as I say, I think God has his plans, but I don't see exactly how the culture of violence will go away. But it's only when we're strong, only when they think that they're going to lose something by it. And we have to, what does it mean to be strong? It means to defend ourselves and to be clear about how we belong here. And also to be clear about how evil has to be eradicated, to really say clearly what's evil and what's not. And people have to be interested in the truth, right? You can't talk to people who are not really interested in hearing the truth, and they make up their own stories about what happens. They say, oh, that's a lie. And people, that actually, that's the truth. Truth and the lie, what's truth and what's a lie is like completely mixed up. But there are good people. There are good people around. And if it's 70% that support Hamas, what do those 30% do? And how can we reach out and try to strengthen those connections? And there are people who are trying to do that. But it's harder now than before, because we used to have people in the village nearby who would come and do work for us, and now we can't, because our community doesn't want to let them in, because when they came into the communities in the South, they had maps, they had lists of all the people who lived there. They knew if somebody had a dog or not. They knew everything about them, and when they leave the house and when they're home, and so they could go and look, and they could kill everybody and butcher everybody. So the people who live in our communities don't want that to happen here. So, so you can't blame us.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and thank you for sharing your perspective. Well, you were there, you are from Israel, you were a psychologist, a logotherapist there, you are in contact with your community, right? And this is a important perspective for us to understand, or try to understand better, right? Well, there are some authors like that would argue that the cause of the conflicts are mainly from religious beliefs, right? So we have like Sam Harris, it's a very popular thinker, especially here in the United States. Yuval Harari, right? He's from Israel. He would argue that as well, right? Of course, these are very respectful, and I love to read their books. But of course, there are many others that will argue, no, the religious differences are not the cause, but maybe the interpretation, the misinterpretation of these beliefs, right? That will take us apart from our common grounds, right? If society, if humanity is only one humanity, right? As Frankl says about the monanthropism, our beliefs can't alienate me from other people, right? It would be contradictory. So
Right.
yeah,
Frankl says religions are like different languages, right?
right,
So it shouldn't drive us apart, but it's only, as you say, it's a misinterpretation. I mean, a lot of I think the worst tragedies and and violence were people who were not religious. Were totalitarian leaders that were not religious. But when people say that any monotheistic religion creates us and them and is going to separate people, that's only because their perspective on it is that that's that's what religion does, because
right,
it's always going to cause people to insist that everyone sees things their way. I mean, I can only speak for Judaism and say, according to the Jewish religion, we're not interested in everybody converting to Judaism. We're interested in everybody in the world being who they are. And
right.
and 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 realizing that one God, it's only through recognizing and worshiping that one God created all of us, that we can all be
Yeah,
loving to each other.
yeah. I think it is in the core of every religion, right? That to love one another, to live in peace, to believe in God, to praise for nature and all the beautiful things that we have in common in this world, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, these are I think these are some of the biggest challenges that we as psychologists or mental health professionals we have to face and help. As you said, right? I think I totally agree. We have to educate people, right? We have to invite people to reflection, to try to accept the differences and try to deal with these differences in a peaceful way, right? Yeah. How this relationship between societal trends and individual mental health, how do they influence each other, right? So the individual and the societal trends. Yeah.
Yeah. So the society influences the individual because, first of all, we don't like to be alone. Like people like to go to a sports event or music in an auditorium and not just sit at home and watch on TV, because there's something in the energy of the atmosphere that we like to enjoy things together with others. But then society can pressure us into doing things that damage our mental and even physical health and well-being. So we get pushed into unhealthy trends, and totalitarianism takes away people's freedoms. But on the other hand, we can't only blame the totalitarian regime, because people allow themselves to be sucked into it as well.
Right.
We allow our freedom to be taken away. But individuals can also, it works the other way. Individuals can influence society by standing up for themselves. And I think if you ask about as a mental health professional, one of the things that we do a lot as mental health professionals is to help
Yeah.
people to think for themselves and stand up for themselves.
Right.
And we've seen this happen. For example, girls who were in a sports team and stood up all together and refused to participate if their boy's going to be competing with, as if
Yeah.
there's no difference and between boys and girls. So they won't play with the boys on the sports team. The kind of things can only happen if people all stand up as a group, and the individual thinking. This gets back to what I said before. If the individual expresses their uniqueness,
Right.
and they think for themselves, then that independent thinking can influence the society in a good way. If it's a kind of independent thinking that really comes from the will to meaning, and not the
Right.
will to
Yeah.
pleasure or the will to power, then you can then it's going to be something that's helpful to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. You made me remember about my visit to Berlin many years ago. I went there, and there was a couple there that I met. They were very nice, and they took me to a tour to a prison in East Berlin, and they told me, well, if you go there by yourself, you probably won't find the prison, or if you ask the neighbors, because many people there deny or they don't believe that the prison existed the way they say it existed, because it was from the previous to the end of the Soviet Union, right? And it's very interesting because you go there, and one of the guides there, he was a prisoner there, and he shows us the prison, and he tells us that he was arrested because he wanted to listen to the West radio. That's the main reason, right?
Yeah.
And to notice, when we look at history, how people in the West were in Berlin specifically, because they couldn't see their families or their friends who were in the east side of the wall, and when the wall came down, right, the first night that they knew that they could cross the wall, so everybody was there, right? So it's interesting that in every crisis, social crisis, we will always see some individuals who will stand up, right, to do something different, right, to think different, and it's from these different people, right, the different individuals, that the change will also start, right? Of course, if you can join others, but you have to be strong enough also to tell what you think and to tell what you believe, right? To stand up for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why conscience requires courage. It needs
Yes.
integrity and courage, and it's not always easy. But
Yeah.
but people who follow their conscience will say, it would be much worse if I couldn't live with myself. Than
Yeah.
if I live with myself, I have to pay the price.
Yeah, and that is very interesting when we understand about Viktor Frankl's theory, because when he talks about the collective guilt, that there is no collective guilt. This is something really big. It comes from a man who was arrested, who went to the concentration camps, who lost all his family, and who suffered for more than 3 years in 4 different concentration camps, right? And then after the war, he says, well, you can't tell that everyone who worked for the Nazi regime has the same level of guilt, because people are influenced, people are manipulated, right? As we so we have to try to understand, and I think this is a key also for dialogue, right? For a global dialogue with people who are different from us, right? Because we can't
Yeah, but
yeah.
there has to be a willingness to really be open to listen,
Yeah.
and be interested in be sincerely interested in what the other person has to say, and not just, I'll hear what you have to say so I can knock it down as soon as you're finished.
Yeah,
it's,
yeah, yeah.
it's like we're both trying to get to the truth,
Yes.
right? And that kind of
Yeah.
dialogue where we're both trying to get to the truth, and we use that right hemisphere of the brain to realize
Yeah.
that we don't know everything, and we not only that we want to embrace the differences because we think it's a good thing, but
Right.
we only see a partial part of the picture. The other person
Yeah.
sees another little part of the picture, so we need them, not just because we care, but because for us to get a fuller understanding, we need to hear their perspective.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's something for us to think about nowadays with technology, right? Because I think that what social media does nowadays, and we have to think about that and try to propose some changes in social media as well. Because I think the way that the robots work doesn't help the social dialogue, and the robots they work based on profit. So if you are
Yeah.
in every social media or in your Google account, if you are interested in understanding the left, right, or the right in political terms, you will just receive information about that side
Yes.
of the thing, right? So then
Yeah.
you will never listen to what your neighbor is listening because he wants to understand the right, and
Hmm.
the polarizing scenario will be increased even more, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I don't know, like I said before about the changes in Israel, like we also have to know what we is beyond our control, but we have to know
Right.
that every little thing that we do does have an impact,
Yeah.
and all we can do is do what's within our power to do,
Right.
one little
Yeah.
thing at a time, and know that every little thing we do makes a difference.
Yeah. But by the way, do you know any logotherapists from the Arab community or the Palestinian community? Are there any logotherapists or any mental health psychologists that you know there?
Not that I know of. I mean,
Yeah.
we're still trying to get logotherapy out there more in Israel altogether, and I think logotherapy is a big has so much to offer, and it's so little recognized still,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it comes kind of from outside of the scientific world, because of
Hmm.
that emphasis on the spiritual dimension of the person, and on values.
Right.
um, it doesn't focus on behavioral manipulation, and on what are your thoughts, what are your emotions, in ways that can measure, are
Yeah.
measurable.
Yeah.
It's not so measurable. you know
Yeah.
and so I think that's why it's not so respected. um
No.
and that's another thing. We have to just, little by little, we have to just I'm just do what I do, and that's all. I just have to keep doing what I can
Right.
do.
Yeah. Well, we see some advances in there, right, in terms of research, and we see some people, some logotherapists publishing articles linking logotherapy with other
Yeah.
behavioral sciences. I think it's building there, right? It's possible, but yeah, I agree with you. There is some prejudice. There are some prejudices, and people, if they see, well, oh, logotherapy, it talks about spiritual dimensions. No, no, it's not science. But well,
Yeah.
you can't
Yeah, but
disregard that. Yeah,
but you see, even with the inroads of research that are being done, it's
yeah.
because it's research similar to what's already done in the field of psychology. It's not because, oh, here's something totally
Oh
different.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
right, the spiritual dimension is something that's missing, and we have to
yeah.
include it. That's still not really. I don't really hear that being said.
I see. I
But
see.
unless, I don't know, there are also those psychologists who say, yeah, I do that all the time. I'm always looking for meaning. Um,
Yeah,
but still they don't. You know, they're missing the skills of logotherapy.
I
They
see.
they you know they just right? You know what I'm saying? They do virtually, which is great, but they still don't recognize that logotherapy gives you a kind of a direction and guidance into how to do it, because it's not always so easy. You need to empathize with the person and then challenge them at the same time. You
Yeah.
need to know, when they're just going around in circles and not getting somewhere, and
Yes.
and when they need to vent, and when now you need to like help them shift them to a different perspective.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's why it's an art. That it's not just that it's not measurable. It's a real
Yeah.
art.
It's a real art. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And maybe that's why it's so effective, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But there was something else that you had asked in our first attempt to record, which is what has changed since October 7th and today. Maybe we
Oh,
could ask that.
perfect. That's a great question. Yeah, please.
Yeah. So this is something that I think people in the world don't always understand about Israelis, which is nobody believes today that a Palestinian state will bring peace. Okay,
Okay.
people around the world still have that delusion, and we think of it as a delusion, right?
Okay.
Because since they attacked the most radical peace camp in Israel with no sign of regret, um, people have come around to they've really changed. There's been a big shift where people understood they were living in a dream world, and then we had this painful awakening that shattered those delusions. And so we know better today who we are and what we are dealing with. And so as a society we have a stronger in our belief in God, and people are trying in small ways to heal the differences between us also. I think deep down we know that we love each other, but we have to get off our high horses sometimes and listen to each other more, as I said before. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that this is why, maybe I can end with this, that the reason why logotherapy is so important in the world today is that because it's not a science, because it reaches out to the human in us, um, we're not going to heal as a society if we are thinking of the human being as a machine, or as an animal,
Right.
or something that just has to be manipulated in some way. But we have to know how to find the human in us, and to access our free will and access our will to meaning. That's what's going to heal the world. Um, so we got to keep
Right.
going.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Batya, thank you for sharing that. I well, it's you know that this conversation with you is very important for us, right? Because it helps us to understand, and I'm sure it will help everyone who is watching or listening to us uh, to understand the spirit that you see as a psychologist in Israel. Because for many people here in the United States or around the world, we see people have some confusions, right? Some misunderstandings about what is right, what is wrong, and I think that this is a way to help, especially the youth, to understand better the what is going on actually, right? And you're right. Many people see that if you see the actions from the Israeli government now, people, especially young people, will say, "Well, Israel is wrong," right? And people were defending this with their lives, right? Protesting against Israel. But if you go back to October 7, if you just look at what happened to your community, right, to your country, and you will always, of course, feel devastated because it was a horrific moment in history. And you will say, well, the Hamas is totally wrong and we have to fight this group. And now we have this conflict going on, right? So to address individuals, right, to think about these groups and not in the mass perspective, but in the community perspective and in the personal perspective, is a challenge for all of us. And I think that your perspective is very, very helpful, right? And I
thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just about perspective. I mean, I can have a perspective from where I'm sitting as far as how it impacts my day-to-day life, but more first before we even get to the perspective, like I said, Frankl says you have to see reality as it is. So when people just swallow propaganda as if that's the truth, and they're basing their whole opinion on a lie, right? So the very first step is to know
what is the
really
source,
happening.
right? What is the source of your perspective, right? Yeah.
Where are you getting your information from?
Yes.
Right. And the news today is, the news outlets are really not giving you true information. That's just the way it is. So you have to somehow find a way to get it.
Yeah. Well, we know there is a crisis in news, right? Especially because of social media, how everyone now is able to give information without checking, right, if it's true or not. So, and everything that is spectacular it spreads a lot, and it trends and has millions of followers, and yeah, there are so many challenges today. But I'm very glad that we can do what we are doing now, right, and trying to build bridges and present these bridges and these different perspectives and feelings and thoughts about reality, and that you are doing. Thank you so much, Batya. Thank you so much. That was a great talk.
Thank you, Élison. I enjoyed. Okay.
Okay.